The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, folks. This is Chris Blask. I'm going to be your host and moderator today. It's right at the top of the hour, so we are going to give folks a few minutes to log in, as is always the case. I see people popping in. And in the meantime, I am going to read a script that would normally be written by read by our community director, Debbie Windle, who is in transit at the moment from being a good parent. Not that she's not a good parent, but she's been doing family things. And still a good parent, is currently in an airplane, which is what I meant to say. So with no further ado, I'll start into that stuff. This will go on for a few minutes. I'll give a short slide presentation, introduce the panel, and we will run through all or most of our 90 minutes in that conversation. So, welcome to the Industrial Control System Information Sharing Analysis Center's monthly public briefing. We'll take another minute or two to give those who are still logging in a chance to complete the process. During this time, I will provide some housekeeping guidelines. If you're calling in on the phone, you will find a PIN number on the GoToWebinar application. Please enter this PIN into your phone and press pound. This will allow us to manage any background noise. My name is not Debbie Windle, Chris Blask, but I will be your host and moderator for today's session. I serve as chair of the center, as well as, I'm not reading that, Debbie, thank you very much, but that's very complimentary, the tech guru for the SARA pilot and lab projects, facilitator and coordinator for all things policy related. In case you're not aware of yet of the full range of collaborative products we have to offer, make sure you check out our LinkedIn group, Twitter account, website, blog posts, and other mediums. Plus, we hope you'll take full advantage of our briefings, as well as our Thursday open forum discussion sessions for members only. Our goal is to get our members accurate, timely, and actionable information in a way that best suits their needs. Today's briefing, SARA, the inevitability of knowledge sharing, features a panel of distinguished subject matter experts, including Graham Speake, Principal System Architect at Yokogawa, Tim Conway, Technical Director for ICS and SCADA programs at SANS, Michael Assante, ICS Lead also at SANS, and Wes Young, who is a Security Architect and big brain for the Research Education Network Information Sharing Analysis Center, the REN-ISAC. During this presentation, I will take the first few minutes to lay some background to frame the issue. Next, the panel will spend about 35 to 40 minutes for the discussion. Finally, there will be time for questions and answers and open discussion at the end of the presentation. I will be attempting to keep as many of you as possible off mute so you can speak your thoughts or raise questions as appropriate. But please mute your headsets or phones if necessary to help reduce unwanted background noise. When speaking, please introduce yourself and indicate your industry affiliation. Additionally, if you would like to ask a question, you may also use the hand raise feature in the GoToWebinar application. After the meeting, a recording of this session will be available on the center's website. So now, without any further delay, let's move into the background portion of this briefing, which is my cue to put on my Chris hat and lay the background for this. So this panel is one of a series of our monthly briefings where we've been talking through the rise of information sharing, where we are right now and what needs to be done about this. In this particular one, we want to talk about how this has been building up for some time, where we are right now, and where we go with that. So this is why we have the speakers that I'll introduce some greater depth in a few minutes. And where this is all leading to, just to set the framework for what we're talking about, is the evolution of knowledge sharing networks, where for a lot of reasons we're connecting facilities in the ICS space, we're connecting entities of all sorts in the greater information technology space. But looking at critical infrastructure, we start with the premise that if facilities themselves are unaware of who they are, what they have, what it's doing, and so forth, then sharing information with them ends up being fairly pointless, doesn't work, they don't know what to do with it, that they don't have information to share with the rest of us, and therefore we stay stuck in the world where half of water facilities can come under attack during this next sentence and we wouldn't know it, which is probably going to be a bad thing. So we start with facilities. We connect them with sharing means, sharing human to human like we're doing right now, where people get together and talk about things, as well as sharing computer to computer, automated systems that respond at at high speeds, which are sort of necessary to keep us all alive. We build these networks based on the accumulation of experience that we've built up all together over a long period of time. And we look at common concerns. From the industrial control system ISAC space, we look cross-sector. We tend to view our infrastructure as a single item as opposed to necessarily a stovepiped separate infrastructure, that it's all interdependent. And as many people in our audience here live, who will listen to this later and on our panel today, know from personal experience, that we're very connected internationally, all of this, in every way you can imagine. So to this end, the ISAC has been developing a project called SARA, hence the small and probably fairly lame joke in the title of this section. So SARA is the Situational Awareness Reference Architecture. It's a compilation of the tools and techniques, skills, best practices, standards, and so forth that we've all built up over time to our point today to do these things. It's meant to be a guideline that facilities and knowledge centers and others can use to reach at least a certain level so we can all be tall enough to get on the ride in the first place. And based on open standards and, where possible, open source tools and technologies, things that anybody should be able to do, whatever their capabilities or resources or lack thereof. And of course, combining all the efforts in the industry and including the vendors themselves. As Graham Speake from Yokogawa here can attest, and various of us on the phone have been vendors and solution providers and integrators and consultants over time. Many of you are those same folks. All of this has to support all of the models. Solution providers, vendors, integrators need to be able to build their businesses on these sort of things. They need to fit into the business operations of facilities, whether they're nonprofit, for-profit, public, private, what have you. So just dwelling for a second to look at SARA. SARA, we have perhaps fairly arbitrarily, but logically we think anyways, broken this down into these 4 components, where looking at it from a facility perspective, for example, that we need to know who we are. Are we a nonprofit municipal wastewater facility? How do we go about making decisions? What are our real concerns and goals, and what are our capabilities? What do we have? At the device level, do I even know what PLCs and routers and switches and HMIs and SCADA servers and so forth I have? If I don't, how would I use information shared with me in the first place? Can I tell what it's doing? Do I know that it's normally supposed to be doing these things, and gosh, it suddenly started doing interesting and fascinating things that I didn't tell it to do, or not? And how do I play well with others? And to develop out of all of this a guide that can be used, that is specifically targeting about a 50-page document. A lot of this has been framed already, and we'll look to deliver a draft of that at the end of this year, and to demonstrate all these things in a pilot, again, which we can talk about at some greater depth. So this is the timeline, again, we're talking about. So between now and the end of the year, a lot of this stuff is underway already, and then next year to expand this into a larger frame. And for a relationship of object perspective, or a diagrammatic look at what SARA is, it's this sort of thing. And this is specifically the pilot. There's actually more entities involved in this at this point, but the point was to have at least 2 knowledge centers, in this case the ICS-ISAC, and another nonprofit that many of you are familiar with, EnergySec, that shares information in the energy sector, so that we can have automated sharing between 2 different knowledge centers, because once 2 have done it, everything else is just a different type. I'm sharing it from a nonprofit cross-sector to a nonprofit sector-specific, or to a public sector municipal, or a public sector state or federal or international, whatnot. Those sorts of decision-making processes and technologies end up being versions of. And from an asset owner to a knowledge center. In this case, we're working with one of our members, an organization known as Enernex, that again many of you are familiar with, who have a smart grid lab. So in their case, they have an electrical distribution and smart meter network in a box, literally in a room, and they're working with us and our vendor and integrator partners to implement technologies in their lab in the kind of environment you see on the screen. where we'll be able to say that at an asset owner facility, that if you have these sorts of technologies, specifically we'll be using the ActiveMQ, an open source message bus, message sharing architecture that EnergySec has already implemented to move messages back and forth, working with vendor and vendor partners like SourceFire and Tripwire and Yokogawa and others to put their equipment in the lab, demonstrate how that provides visibility, and capture that so that people can replicate this in their own worlds. And as you see at the top there's a new entity that, if you're not familiar with, is worth looking into, Threat Connect. Just a plug for them. These are some NSA analyst folks who have started this, been doing analytics, former NSA analyst folks, for the record, who have been doing analytics for a living, have built this system, and just at Black Hat in the last couple of weeks launched Threat Connect, which is effectively a social networking tool for analytics. It allows you to create communities and share communities and share indicators among trusted communities. And they've created an ICS-ISAC community inside Threat Connect and are working with us through this pilot to demonstrate how this stuff gets done. So, I'm sorry, that's the wrong list of folks on the line. So let me go back to my script, and we'll get into the panel part of this. And I will say, now for this month's ICS-ISAC featured panelists. Graham Speake is the principal architect at Yokogawa. As the principal architect, Graham is highly skilled system security professional with a wealth of experience on both process control system security and IT security from the vendors as well as the asset owner's perspective. Prior to joining Yokogawa, Graham spent 10 years at British Petroleum, where he was employed primarily as the security risk manager in the downstream business unit, and 15 years at ATOS Origin in various IT and security roles. His ICS career started with designing software for emergency shutdown and fire and gas detection systems. So we'll save the Deepwater Horizon jokes for later. Tim Conway is Technical Director for ICS and SCADA programs at SANS. As Technical Director for ICS and SCADA at SANS, Tim is responsible for technical component development, review, and implementation within the SANS ICS and SCADA product offerings. He is the current chair of the NERC CIP Interpretation Drafting Team, a member of the NESCO Advisory Board, current chair of the NERC CIPC GridX Working Group, and chair of the National Board of Information Security Examiners, Smart Grid Cybersecurity Panel. Michael Assante is an internationally recognized expert and thought leader in information and cybersecurity. He recently held the position of Vice President and Chief Security Officer at NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, and oversaw the implementation of cybersecurity standards across the North American electric power industry. Prior to NERC, he held notable positions at the Idaho National Laboratories, American Electric Power, and pioneered the security intelligence landscape in his role as Chief Operating Officer of Logic Keep, a former U.S. Naval Intelligence Officer with experience in information warfare and information security management. Michael recognized the need to bring intelligence-type analysis to the networks of the corporate world by identifying risks and threats to specific hardware, software, and systems. And finally, Wes Young, last but not least, Security Architect for REN-ISAC. He is a security engineer, threat analyst, and primary code monkey with the research and education network ISAC. Wes spends the majority of his time evangelizing, building tools to promote intelligence sharing. Hobbies include long walks on the beach, golfing, snowboarding, and pretending he's a day trader. So, with all that said, Graham, if I can start with you and get a couple of minutes of your thoughts on all of this. So as your bio states, you are currently in the dreaded vendor position where you are responsible for producing a lot of the gadgets that we build these systems out of. And you've got a rich history in building all of this stuff from asset owner and another perspective. Can you give us a couple thoughts on how we got to where we are and whether the future looks grim or bleak in the topic we're at today?
Yeah, sure, Chris. As I said, I was in BP, and so that was a large asset owner, widely dispersed all over the globe, I forget how many sites we had. It was, 400 or 500 operating sites, which were refineries, oil platforms, and the like. One of the things we were doing there was we were trying to gather information on threats, on what was happening, and then trying to look at our risk against those threats. Now I'd left there like nearly 4 years ago. So yeah, in that time, a lot of things have changed. Back then, there was very little information sharing. So there were a few companies that were offering it, primarily aimed at the IT world. So you could find out what IT threats were there, and they took the Windows vulnerabilities, they took vulnerabilities from other components, but primarily IT. Recently, over the last few years, and I know you've mentioned one that was a black hat, I think there were a couple of black hat this year where people again are looking more at generic information sharing, threat analysis. So there's a lot more going on at the moment. I think we all, in the industry, we all need to share information. I mean, I talk to asset owners now that are our customers. They all want information so they can look at what their risk is for their components. Now, one of their problems, particularly in the ICS world, is inventory. I know that was on one of your slides, Chris. A lot of these companies don't know what their inventory is. They might know they have a Yokogawa control system, but they might not be able to say, well, it's a Yokogawa version XYZ control system, because they don't keep a lot of that up to date. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on a number of bases. Asset owners perhaps need to look more at their inventory, keeping it more up to date. And then from a vendor side, we need to start giving them more information of, well, we've seen this vulnerability or this update from Microsoft. This is how it's going to affect you, and try to give more targeted information down to the asset owners. And we need to perhaps try to draw this in more into a circle so that we're more interactive with our customers and giving them useful information rather than bombarding them with a whole load of information. And asset owners will get information from us, from various government entities, from entities like yourself. It's very hard for them to take all that information and munge it into a piece of information that is useful to them, so they know they have an elevated risk and they need to do something. And so I know there is a number of these companies are looking at the risk and how to do this, but usually most of these external sources are very expensive. So it's trying to work out what is the best bang for your buck to get all this information in. But we all need to start sharing the information, and I think it's not, it's vendors, it's not just the DCS vendor, but it's all your other vendors that make up your components within the industrial control system. So, we're building on top of Windows, we're building on top of bespoke hardware from Dell or HP or whoever. We're adding in other vendor software, whether it's OSIsoft or somewhere else. You need to be able to share all this information, all the threats, all the vulnerabilities, anything that we find, and bring it back to the asset owner in a way that they can easily use it and then look at their risk and then do something about it. And I think it's slowly happening over the years, and I think everybody's understanding we need to do something, but it's how can we do this in a really good, cost-effective manner, not just for the large companies and large asset owners, but I know you're working a lot, Chris, with the water industry, who are very small companies, and they can't afford the $50,000, $100,000 to get some of these threat intelligence systems in. They need something at a lot lower cost, but still have a useful information shared to them. So I think that's my couple of minutes, and let somebody else have a go and see if we can frame the whole subject.
Absolutely. And before I move on, and Michael Assante, I'll pick on you next in just 1 second, but there's as I pulled up on the slide here, you touched on one of the topics I think needs to be talked about a lot, and that's sharing, and specifically. And I think we have a couple bad artifacts in our heads. What we think is basically comes down to, I'm from the government, I'm here to help, all I need is all of your information. And there's a couple points here, right, that mostly, okay, so that's not going to work, right? We know that. Most of the sharing that needs to be done is, as you were saying, Graham, from us, whoever we are, down to an asset owner, so that they can actually use it. Most sharing is, from an asset owner perspective, inbound. How do I take information from someone else and actually use it? We hear this all the time, that from an asset owner, it's like, a couple of years ago I started reading a lot of advisories. Most of them didn't apply to me, or I couldn't tell if they did, and I kind of gave up. So we need to fix that. And the other half of that, the outbound, again, we need to understand that maybe most people don't share anything. Maybe that's fine. What we want is at least a Nielsen rating type of thing, so that we get 1%. As you say, there's a lot of water facilities. There's 100,000 in the U.S. If we get 1,000, we get a couple hundred sharing anything at all, that's huge. 6,000 electric utilities, 60 of those, hey, that's one per state, and gives us a decent statistical odd of knowing whether or not we've just been pwned by someone. So how we think about sharing, and this, to the point of today's conversation, in the last 24 months, I think the maturity level of folks, like everybody on the panel here, and frankly most of the people here at all, where the folks talk about this all the time, this conversation about what sharing is has gotten a lot better in 2 years.
Yeah, and I think you look at, like, certainly the government in the US, they quite often will share selectively information, and will share it with perhaps an asset owner, and the asset owner has some information they can't share with the vendor, but they're saying, can you fix this problem, but I can't tell you what the problem is, or can you tell us in a vague term? So sharing is going to be two ways. That if the government wants us to share, they've got to be able to share back. So we are more willing to share because we are going to get that information as well.
Yeah, and it's multi-direction. And I'll stop myself after maybe one more quick comment, just to not tangent too much on this stuff. But it's multi-directional. This comes up all the time. Last week, the National Information Exchange Model meeting in D.C. Pointed to this a lot. A lot of conversations that I want to touch on in this later in this panel. Very recent days that we're sort of all part of have touched on this again. This is not a star topology sharing network. This isn't the government sharing with us. It's not us sharing with the government. It's a mesh network. There's all sorts of entities, that will share different information in different directions for different reasons. So with that, Michael, can I ask you to say a few words and share your thoughts?
I'd love to. This topic is near and dear to my heart in lots of ways. I've had the pleasure, and I appreciate being able to be preempted by Graham. I respect his experience greatly, and he's doing a lot of work to improve information sharing, particularly from an ICS supplier perspective, and I think it's fantastic. And I get to preempt a lot of other folks here I respect here today. So here I go. I have served in this strange capacity of I've run an ISAC, been responsible for an ISAC. I've sat as a chief security officer at a major asset owner. I've actually helped support in the DHS ICS certain program, and had some other weird jobs here in between. So either you've determined that I can't hold a job, or I've had some interesting perspectives in the challenges associated with each one of those kind of roles and responsibilities around information sharing. And I'll say this: there's a framework of, and information sharing is just such a terrible catch-all because there's different types of information to share to support different types of decision making. And I typically think of it as a model. You think of it at the highest sense, there is a concept of strategic awareness. What is the state of the union? What is possible? Where am I relative to my peers? what decisions do I need to make at the highest level to inform investment decisions and programmatic decisions. How do I build a program? That's this non-real-time information sharing. You want that information to be comprehensive. You want to have enough of an understanding to support what you're going to do with that information. In this case, make some strategic decisions. You'll go down to the next level, which is this operational planning. What information do I need shared to support operational planning? And operational planning requirements will be different than investment and programmatic decision requirements. And you're getting a little more fidelity in the information that you need. You're going to apply it to specific circumstances, and that's important. And then you're going to get down to this area between operations and technical and tactical. And so I'm going to support operations. We're going to make decisions on live systems. We're going to be doing these types of things, and that information it needs to be very timely. In many cases, it doesn't necessarily need to be completely comprehensive. It needs to be enough for me to make the right decision in the context of the time. And so there's definitely this idea, and then below that there's this concept of how do you share information and allow computers to make decisions at computer speeds to keep up with certain things. And I would argue that information will roll down from those higher elements of operational planning decisions or informing operations, things like there's this threat that's emerging that we're worried about manifesting in the next couple of days that is going to drive down. There's also information when incidents are occurring and systems are being compacted of going back up, and lessons learned and incidents and those things. And threat information will span everything from strategic awareness down to these operational decisions. And so if that's a framework, we have different roles and responsibilities trying to share information in that to support strategic or operational or tactical decision making. And you've got what I'll call the triad plus the friendly uncle. And when you think of ICS systems, the real triad and that are always going to be sharing information no matter what happens, and how good they are at it might differ depending on the programs and the mechanisms, but you have the ICS supplier, it's the person who designed and innovated and provides and supports the technology we deploy. You have the end user, who's actually the customer who's deployed the technology, who's operating it. The vendor might, by the way, have a role in actively maintaining that system. And then you've got expert level resources. You've got cybersecurity researchers. You have integrators. You've got folks out there who interact with the technology, the people. And this triad is what typically in non-incident based is sharing information. When I say the friendly uncle, sometimes there's someone sitting in the middle as a broker. Sometimes it is an industry-organized ISAC, for example, like the ES-ISAC or the REN-ISAC or the ICS-ISAC. Sometimes it's a U.S. government program like the ICS-CERT, which acts as a broker, tries to play the third-party objective organization between all three. And sometimes, in the case of the friendly uncle, the government, whether it's the U.S. government or the UK government or alike, is providing their understanding and information that in some cases might be unique to them back into this equation. And so what I would argue is we've done a pretty good job of recognizing some of these roles, and we've developed some systems that tend to work at a operational planning level. I think even at a strategic level, like for example, the friendly uncle likes to take the job on of explaining the state of the union, what you need to think about to inform investment decisions. These are high-level strategic discussions. I think the friendly uncle does a pretty good job in terms of that role. But as we get down the framework towards operational operations and tactical information sharing, we still don't know how to make that work very well. I want to take one specific example. If you think of an end user, so in this case, when I was a chief security officer of a major utility, I use that end user example. I'll just use electricity example right now. There are things with information sharing between end users and the rest of this triad. Things like what do you feel your responsibilities are? What are the expectations of what information is to be shared? What language will we utilize in sharing that information? And then where you're doing a lot of work, Chris, what mechanisms exist to share the information? And the more tactical you get, the more those mechanisms need to be supported by systems and computers and the like. And I would argue we're really doing a kind of a bad job in that domain of expectations and language. A A lot of it's trial by error. Let's see what's effective, what works, what do we feel good about. But as people move and change, those systems build up a little bit and they break back down again. So there's this lot of storming and changing going on. In the term of, we just did a series of articles and interviews on the anniversary of the 2003 August 14th blackout. What was interesting and fantastic about the blackout is computers played a pretty strong role in a lot of the contributing factors, as noted by the task force report. And there were a lot of confusions on how human beings were interacting with technology, what they expected and how they were relying on the technology, and ultimately how they communicated to each other about their understanding and their situational awareness. So it's an interesting parallel or analog to discuss here. Some of the things that come out of that and have come out of a series of look at this of saying when utilities who are interconnected and have their different roles and responsibilities depending on what assets they own and what functions they perform, they themselves have recognized over the last 10 years that this was a major issue and one of the largest events that affected the industry. 10 years later, I would argue we're still struggling with, we don't have a language to talk about the importance of our SCADA systems and what does it mean to have an event. What does it mean? People will say, my SCADA system is down. Well, what does that mean? You lost view, you lost control, what is it? We don't have a functioning language. Our expectations of what one utility should share to an interconnected neighbor isn't written down. There's an idea of trying to understand its impact on something as abstract as reliability of the system, but how that translates down into the technology or an incident, that isn't worked out. So in those areas, I think we have a long way to go. In terms of, there's this question of learning. Going back up that chart into strategy and operations, there's the idea of we need to learn from the small number, luckily, of incidents that occur so that if it does occur here, we do a good job of understanding why did that occur, were there architectures associated with that enabled that, was there a breakdown in practices, was there human error, do we not have the right security controls in place, or is there really a new threat capability that we need to all learn about? And in those areas, we're not doing a great job either. I would argue that we got to ask ourselves, how do we learn? And I would even, my time with NERC, I would argue that the role of regulation has actually, in many ways, made it very difficult to learn. I think the power system used to do a great job of looking at any power event and conducting what we used to call event analysis. And we'd very quickly publish a sequence of events. This is what happened on the system. And then very quickly you'd be getting the learning would be coming out. As it was learned, it would be coming out saying, oh, everyone go back and check your protective relays, make sure you don't have this setting because this is a problem. You know, we do that sharing. Well, post-regulation, because there's consequences to who knew what when and what was going on, we've seen a step back in how long it takes to learn those things. And in the world of ICS security, I'm telling you, we have ICS security incidents occurring all the time, yet there's very few incident deconstruction and incident lesson learning going on. Now, there's lots of reasons why end users don't want to run around and saying, hey, wow, we just had an embarrassing event and actually affected the operations or commercial availability of my plant or this asset or this system, and those discussions are hard discussions. There needs to be a mechanism for that learning to bubble up in a way that protects the interest of the organizations that own the information, but the same way allows the community to learn. There was recently a water honeynet project done by Trend Micro. It was interesting. There was some learning to be done there. What made it really super interesting was that it was kind of a thing that we could all digest because no one was worried about talking about it. We had a make-believe system, and we had adversaries attacking the system, and let's see how they did it and what were they able to do. And it was like no one got hurt other than the attackers. No one got, and we don't mind if they get hurt. So no one got hurt in this information sharing exercise. But we need to work on what kind of details get shared so we can all learn in a very constructive manner. We're having difficulty with that. We don't do a very good job with incident learning. So I would argue we need to build the mechanisms. If you think about it in this context, we have a long way to go in a lot of different areas.
Very well said. And again, I just want to pick up on a couple of things you said there, sort of quickly, and let Tim slide on in here as well. But three things particularly. So you talked about words, and this has been a lot of the conversation in the last couple of weeks in interesting forums. And again, for my view of things, what gets really interesting is when over time you expect something to happen, you start to see it in multiple places. That's an indication that that the curve you're seeing and the path of the future is probably correct. And the topic of words has come up over and over again just in the last couple of weeks, and in everything, in a longer period as well. So there was an Amber Alert that ICS-ISAC put out in May that you can see how this led to, you can see how the words used in previous years and the last decade or so has led to the artifacts of how that worked. And you can almost see the White House administration back in the late 90s saying we need to make sure that this information gets to asset owners. So people went out and built structures based on those exact words. And when this particular advisory came out, it was put into the structures that were built that you, Michael, were involved with as well with ICS-ISAC. And it was two things that were interesting. They're all public knowledge. One, that the advisory was, the mechanisms are set up to get this information to the asset owners. They were not set up to get it to the actual integrators and the vendors and so forth, who both have a lot to bring to the table, have a lot of work to do when bad things are going on, and have direct deep relationships with tens and hundreds of thousands of asset owners. And it's not because anybody was foolish. It's just because they were following the exact interpretation of the words that were used. So a lot of the difference I see between today and last year and 5 years ago and 10 years ago is that we've had a lot of human communication, a lot of people talking and arguing about words. Is it cybersecurity at all, or is it cyberspace or cyberdash? So those sort of things. And for those of you who hadn't seen Digital Bond's post, August 12th, a week ago, Bob Huber at Critical Intelligence put something up, and myself and Steve Parker and so the usual cast of characters had a conversation there about another one of your points. You talked about the triangles and the triads and so forth. And it's very much, as I said earlier, I think the words we've used earlier led to this star topology idea, that the government will be this mainframe, will all be the terminals, and we'll all listen to that. That's how it's going to work. And reality is much more internet-based. It's much more polygon. The triangles made me think of game development that my son is deep into, that everything's made out of triangles. And in the conversation with Bob Huber and so forth, this came back to this issue again, that we're building this fractal landscape of information sharing, not this star. And finally, just to keep things moving, I can't help noting that in 2003, 10 years ago at this point, I was one of the folks starting up a security information management company when the lights went out. And just the sheer fluke of timing, we had the first of our boxes at the state of New Jersey, also public knowledge. So, and the lights stayed on in Trenton in the south of New Jersey, so we could VPN into it and look at it. And there was this enormous spike of traffic. 20,000 systems attacked the state of New Jersey 10 minutes before the lights went out. And was that complete coincidence or related? The interesting point is we'll never know, because there was not another similar system attached anywhere in the connected systems at that point. So all that forensic information is lost. So again, this is 10 years later. We're here to talk about the change in time. 10 years later, there's a lot of similar forensic log capture or other devices in the connected systems. And in similar instances where we're able to communicate with each other, we actually will be able to see more richly than we were then what happens in the world. So with that, Tim, with your wealth of experience in all of these things as an asset owner, now with SANS and everything else, do you want to offer thoughts of your own or build on what we're all talking about here for a few minutes?
Sure, I will. The problem with being on a panel with these other gentlemen is after Graham and Mike talk, you struggle to figure out what you're going to add. But I'll focus on a couple of things that either you mentioned, Chris, or they brought up. And the thing that keeps coming to my mind is the perspective. There was a lot of discussion in regards to where we need to go and how things could improve. The thing that I kept asking in myself was, have we improved? And again, I'm talking from a asset owner electric sector perspective, and I think the answer is 100% from the electric sector that we have improved. That the information sharing problem definitely still exists, but the way it exists today, we have different problems than we had before. there's still problems that need to be solved, but we're definitely better off than we were years and years ago. And people like Mike and his variety of roles during those years did a lot of work to try to improve this environment. And as you had mentioned, Chris and Graham as well, you guys were all kind of players in this field when things were very bad, and things are much, much better now. So I think you all played a role in getting there, in getting the environments to improve. So I think some of the questions that you asked early on in regards to what organizations need to look at, what do we have, what is it doing, and how do we play with others, I think those were all very, very common questions, even to the degree that people didn't know to ask those questions years ago. You know, they would look at a control system at a generating plant, and they would know they had a control system at the generating plant, and they would know who the vendor is. Down further layers to the degree of all the different components and parts and pieces and the protocols that were in use and the firmware versions and the items that were part of that control system were often not known. And by many, they were just understood to be the integrator that put them in or the vendor that they bought the system from. So there was a great deal of unknowns, and long ago, there wasn't even a level of knowledge to understand that they should know what all those different components are. The second question of what is it doing, if they didn't know they existed, they definitely didn't know what they were doing. And in many cases, they didn't know how they would be doing it. From previous implementations, where it may have been through traditional serial communication, many might not fully understand that that has changed, that it's using different protocols, different communication paths, different level of understanding in regards to how it should operate in normal conditions, how it should operate in emergency conditions, and what it would look like if it was misoperating. So those are things that again, years ago, I don't know that people really 100% understood that it's something they should have knowledge of. The question of how do we play with others? How do you share information? I think that's a question that people are asking now. Before, I think people were asking, why would they, and what information would people even want to know? It was more of a question of what would I bring to another party, and what would be of interest to them. Now, I think people have some awareness in regards to things that would be of interest, and it's really a question of how do we share it. So, you know, you look at the two predominant organizations within the electric sector, and they've been brought up on this call a couple of times, ICS-CERT and the ES-ISAC. And I'll start with the ES-ISAC. Through the establishment of the ISAC back in the late 90s, there was definitely a period of confusion amongst electric asset owners in regards to what their obligations were and what enforcement authority they had, and that changed over time. And exactly, again, what should they be communicating to the ES-ISAC, and what should they be receiving? What did that relationship look like? I think during the period of time that Mike was involved in that ES-ISAC, there was definitely a lot of clarification provided in regards to the benefit of sharing information and the need to share information with them through voluntary reports and in some cases mandatory reporting, depending on what type of event you saw and where it was in your network. Growing all the way into current times, you know, 2010, 2012, that many companies perform kind of annual tests, and as they perform those tests, they do voluntary reporting. Many companies have established a trust relationship with the ES-ISAC where they very openly, you know, at lower levels of the organization, pick up the phone and talk to people at the ES-ISAC about what they're seeing. In our organization, we were to the level that we had kind of third-party intelligence feeds that would come in and make us aware of things kind of in the internet space or different things that they were seeing to us. And we would pick up the phone and make the ES-ISAC aware, simply from the perspective of if other utilities were seeing the same thing, it would be of greater interest than if it was just us. So, and ultimately where they've come to now with their portal. And, the ability for people to get in and work through the portal and see kind of shared indicators of compromise, participate in teams like the Hydra, where they can review and participate in alerts and advisories before they go out to the sector, so they can try to add value to the identification means, and really where I think a lot of work still remains across even the active ISACs is on the mitigation measures, that in a lot of cases they kind of focus on keeping the bad guys out. And I think to some degree they have to, because everybody's environment is somewhat unique and somewhat custom. But the better we get at providing example and guidance to organizations for performing mitigation steps, I think that's kind of the next evolution of the value add through ISACs. But ES-ISAC is definitely getting there. They have the regulatory authority, they have the framework, they have what they need to be successful. Whether other sector ISACs have that or not, that's kind of the question, is where ES-ISAC has grown over the years, have the other ISACs kept up? Are they at the same level? And can they look at what happened with the ES-ISAC and model it? From an ICS cert perspective, I'll just call out a couple of different things. From an asset owner, again, you know, in the 2007 timeframe, 2009 timeframe, the way we obtain kind of information from government, few of us obtained clearances, went to meetings, and we would often leave the meetings with one question in mind, which is, you know, we had to wait a very long time before we received this information. And how do we fix that problem? And we're leaving the meetings with very little information that is actionable that we can go back and do something about. Flash forward to 2012 and 2013, much of the information that we're receiving is not through those channels. They've figured out ways to get below the SARA lines and not need them, you know, in classified space, so we can much, much more rapidly in real time receive information, and the information is far more actionable with indicators of compromise that we can load into our tools, tactics, techniques, and protocols that we can look to see are we seeing any of those behaviors in our environments, and some mitigation measures as well. So now the questions that are asked when we go to any of the briefings is, you know, much of the information that we've heard we already knew. And it's a question of what can we do better, especially in conversations on mitigation steps. So what kind of information sharing can asset owners share with each other and say, based on the intelligence we received, based on the indicators of compromise we received, here's the tools and the products that we are using, here's what they did for us, and perhaps you can pursue them within your environment to increase your capability. Overall, I think we have dramatically improved within the sector. There is definitely things that remain as far as information sharing on mitigation steps. And I think some of the questions that we're asking have evolved, and that's all a good sign. So I definitely have more of an optimistic view. The pessimistic side would be, are we improving at a rate that is equivalent to the level of the attacks that we're seeing? And I would believe the answer is no. But I'll leave that open for further questions.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll follow in sort of reverse order on that. I'm sort of outrageously optimistic. However, we're definitely not in the applied world advancing as fast as the attacks. I think the third question to that is, can we catch up? And I think we can, but it's as always with these things. We prepare our slides the night before instead of a week before. We as a culture, I think as a combined culture, have this tendency to wait to the last minute. And not to be particularly alarmist, but I think we're sort of in that phase. If you can imagine any parts of this taking realistically, a year, 2, 3, 5, 7 years, in every case, that's about how much time we have before, a reasonable and prudent forecast of when we'll absolutely have to have them will be. So I don't think we have a lot of time to sit around deciding how to do this stuff. But I think that to the point of all of you and Michael and Graham put, we have over the last number of years gone a long way and laid all sorts of groundwork. This really is the premise that is our prime premise. It's what I'm going to ask Wes to talk about as soon as I shut up for a second. And it's what SARA is all about. SARA is just a instantiation of things that many of us have been saying for many years. And the point is that if you just took a reasonable amount of effort and drew together things that already exist, we can make this work now without a great deal of effort. And lastly, just to underline that with again one of your first points, it's long been a point of mine that in the industrial control systems space we have certain advantages. We spent a long time over the last number of years, 10 years or whatnot, looking at the problems and challenges. But as you say, it's interesting and ironic and perhaps sometimes frustrating that facilities have not had a good inventory of what they have and have not a good view of the activity going on. But one of the advantages that we have in the ICS space is that these people and these systems are all about inventory and activity. It's just a fluke of nature that we've gotten to this point where the only thing that they really don't know exactly where it is and what it's doing and where it's been is the system they use for knowing where things are and what they've been doing and where they've been. But again, we have the tools to fix all that. So without any further ado, and Wes, thank you for waiting this long to get your first spot in this sort of busy panel we have today. I'd love to hear, I think our current and future audience listening to this later on will be very happy to hear your perspective. And as I very often say, I use the REN as an example. You folks have been pressed with all the worst problems. Your schools, universities where the bad guys are on the inside. These polyfractal networks that are as complicated as ICS networks aren't, and huge attacks. And what you and the REN-ISAC have done in recent years is the living example of the fact that we have built up the capability to do these things and use them to real effect today. So with that, I'll clam up and you can have the stage.
Thanks, Chris. I was going to say, I don't really have anything interesting to say about anything SCADA, and I am way out of my league here. So I'm going to reshift the conversation a little bit. And while education is sort of the center and focus of what we do and what our problem looks like, the story I like to tell is, here's kind of how we approach our specific problem in higher ed, which is, I'll say, infinitely complex when you look at the broad spectrum of things you need to protect yourself against. And how, sharing data is one of those. We should do it, but there's so much. Where do we even start? We frame the conversation around the problem in higher ed. You think about universities and large bandwidth and 10, 100 gig links to the internet, 50 to 100,000 nodes. Some are managed, some are unmanaged on the network itself. Student laptops, students that come in and out of the campus on a regular basis, in and out of the country on a regular basis, and professors that sort of float around from campus to campus and country to country. On top of that, you might have minimal SCADA systems kind of baked into the background, old UPSs, PL controllers, and all that fun stuff. Nothing too catastrophic, but enough to take down an institution should something happen. So there's an element of that. And if you notice on some of the SCADA lists, you'll see some of the higher ed people who are thinking about this kind of thing, EMP and server racks, and how you deal with some of the more physical attacks that might happen as a result to these kind of systems that are somewhat on the network, some not on the network, and sort of the thinking down that line. So if you think about that in the broad spectrum, what we had to protect ourselves against, in the late 90s and early 2000s, we found out a lot of those 50,000, 100,000 nodes and those laptops and those unmanaged machines were publicly available on the internet. Lots of schools don't have firewalls, they don't have managed machines in some cases. It's really hard to kind of protect a lot of back-end controllers and a lot of corporations. You have firewalls, you have lockdown policies, you have managed machines, and it makes it pretty easy. In higher ed, that's just not the case. We enjoy what we call free love, where you can kind of just come and go as you please and do whatever you want on the network, and hopefully nothing happens. So in the early 2000s, we were sort of faced with this question that, well, given all these things and the fact that we're now rolling out IPv6 in production space where only the networking gear actually supports it, there's no security, there's no firewall, even if you wanted to, you couldn't do it. How do you protect yourself? And we found information sharing was the only thing we could do. All things being equal, we could only tell each other, here's where the botnets are, here's where the phishing stuff happens, here's what's going on, scanning wise, people are hitting us, how do we block this kind of stuff? And we don't have that stuff in line. So the community sort of organized itself before the REN-ISAC. The REN-ISAC was stood up in the early 2000s along with all the other ISACs, and it sort of stayed dormant as groups like UNISOG and NANOG sort of sprung up. And we sort of did our own information sharing. And in 2005, 2006, we sort of merged with the REN-ISAC. And at that time, we sort of had these wonky tools and Perl scripts and Bash scripts where you could centralize. You could put data on a web page, and you had some scraper tools that would pull it down and put it into your IDSs, and it sort of started us. We start tugging on that thread and figuring out, well, we know we have to eventually get to a point where we can share knowledge about people and spies and espionage and all that kind of stuff. But today, what's something simple we can keep tugging on and to flush out both the technical aspects of how you share data, but also the legal aspects. It's one thing for a security analyst to be on a mailing list and participating in sharing information, or a portal or anything else. It's entirely another when you start speaking automation into that. Lawyers are comfortable with participation, but if you start saying, well, we're going to take our firewalls or our logging devices and we're going to mesh them together with other universities, and in real time, if device A in site A picks up a scanner, site B can automatically block that scanner in a matter of seconds rather than a matter of going through the human interrupt, and having that legal conversation. And so we started down that path. Where we got to over the last couple of years is developing software internally to institutions. So the REN-ISAC community has 400 or some odd institutions and about 1,000 security engineers that participate pretty actively, sharing threat intelligence, sharing whatever. And out of that comes the need for automation. You have 1,000 security engineers who are responsible for their site-wide security, not just the school of X, but the entire university. They can make decisions on the university level. It gets pretty loud, so automation is kind of the only way we can keep the costs down. So we built some software called the Collective Intelligence Framework. We sort of borrowed from IODEF and a couple other places where people have thought about this but haven't been able to implement the technology to scale out the cost and keep it down. And traditionally, there's portals and web frameworks and sharing of PDFs where humans still have to digest information. And while we didn't want to reinvent and create yet another new format and tools, we wanted to sort of borrow when people have been thinking about this to see if we do automation, what does it look like? Can we even do it, and does it scale? And it turns out after a couple of years, it does. Every node you add to the network, it drops the cost of all the additional nodes. And there was some talk about, Chris said earlier, if you get 60 water companies per state participating, and you've got 60,000 of them that kind of just lurk, those small percentages can still protect the entire network. There's a couple of, I think it's a law. You get in any kind of community, 1% highly participate, 10% sort of participate, and the rest of them all watch. But those 10%, if you enable them very little friction to share information, whatever that is, and you just start somewhere, it doesn't actually matter what you're starting with, just expose yourself to being able to automate information sharing, those 10% can protect the entire sector in real time, and then allowing the other 90%, when and if they have good intelligence, to then inject it into the system at the same time, sort of scale-free network. It works really well. And some of the success stories we're starting to see is universities where they're doing this. And this is, we tend to not delve too much into vulnerability information and asset management type stuff. That's sort of left to the lower level universities, or the lower level at the university level. What we tend to delve into is let's start with things we understand, things that can save us money so we can even see what that cost analysis equation looks like. So simple things, botnet IP addresses, botnet domain addresses, botnet URLs, phishing URLs, that kind of network indicator stuff that's easily found in the wild. There's open source feeds we can pull from to kind of see what does it look like using open source feeds and private feeds, and how do we mesh this stuff together. What we found over the last couple of years as we've developed this service internally to the REN-ISAC, and then we've released this is all free code, you can go replicate. There's probably about 200 and some odd people in our CIF community that participate for everything from third world C-certs. They had nothing, so they could download this, have a threat intelligence sharing for free. It takes like 30 minutes to stand. To government agencies who are sort of doing in this how do we share information kind of stuff to private companies who, you know, they need threat intelligence. They need to go and get the indicators. They mesh them with their private feeds, and they need an API where they can, you know, build their applications around the kind of threat, you know, threat intelligence, and not have to reinvent the wheel themselves. As this sort of evolved, we had a number of universities over the last year or two start to stand up and say, you know, I've been running this, and I've been blacklisting simple things like blacklisting DNS stuff internally, you know, doing DNS sinkholing and providing secure DNS for my, you know, my faculty. And what we found was we had an infection rate of, you know, 1,000 infections per week. And at $2,000 or $3,000 an infection, that's so much money we were spending on cleaning up machines. As we've done this over the last 12 months by doing sinkholing, we've noticed the infection rate has gone from 1,000 infections a week to 0, virtually none. And what we've been able to do is then turn around and take our 5 full-time staff. You know, think of a full-time staff around 100,000 a year, take 5 of them and reallocate them to something else. That speaks volumes in terms of information sharing. So the problem is kind of we see it as you expose yourself to just sharing, you know, finding a buddy, finding a friend that you really trust, and saying, you know what, we're going to partner together and just share domains and see where that leads us and start tugging on that thread. 5 years later, what you end up with is not just what's the cost of information sharing saving us. All of a sudden, the risk of management equation kind of changes because you're now talking about full-time staff. You're talking about cycles. You're talking about all these other things that save even more money than just the sharing of itself, and sort of sells itself. So what I have done over the last couple of years now is I kind of go around telling our story as a, you know, in higher ed, you're right, we had the worst of the worst, and we still do. I mean, we have to deal with all sorts of issues from the human element all the way down to the controller side of it, which is still really hard for us. But what we're also able to do is turn around, because we don't have a number of the regulations that the FIs have or that the energy sectors have, and we're able to kind of stand up and, in most cases, talk about what we've done and kind of tell our story. And I know it doesn't directly map to the asset management piece and the vulnerability management piece, which is sort of different, but the higher level story is still kind of the same. You know, format agnostic. We don't really care what the format is. We just care about getting information from point A to point B, sort of giving a roadmap and a blueprint for, okay, you have this problem. We've solved 70, 80, 90% of the transport issues and the legal issues. You know, we open source our legal contracts. We open source how we did, you know, everything code-wise to, you know, the process. If you can, you know, augment that in some way, that you can now share vulnerability information, or you can now share this one specific kind of indicator with maybe 5 other sites and pilot it out, sort of like Chris is doing. Next year, the conversation sort of evolves out of that. And if we're able to help bootstrap that, kind of, you know, be the canary in the coal mine, saying, hey, you know, it's okay. Automated data sharing really works, and here's how to approach your lawyers, here's how to approach your vendors, here's how to approach the government. You know, we've been sort of a really good example of that. We sort of use the statistic, you know, higher ed sort of, it's different, but at the same time, if you think of what happens in higher ed, you know, where does most of the intellectual property in this country be developed? Mostly higher ed. Where does a lot of the research happen? Higher ed. You know, the mesh of personalities, cultures, and conflicts that kind of go through, you know, each of the different universities competing together for grant money, competing for research dollars, competing for students, but at the same time, we've been able to turn around and on the operations side, level the playing field, because we recognize that what we're really competing against is, you know, our business, not against the bad guys. And if we can lower that cost basis, I think over the last 5 years, we've maybe spent, combined with some grant funding from the National Science Foundation, under $3-4 million. That's, you know, FTE cost to develop open source software. And a lot of that can be kind of reintroduced into the community. They can leverage and use for free. And if we've been able to do that with that much, you know, think of what you could do if you have huge budgets where you can kind of take this stuff and run with it. And we can help answer those questions along the line. So.
Well, that's yeah, I can honestly say, Wes, you're my hero.
You need new friends.
Yeah, I know. I need to get out more, but I hang around folks like all you guys too much, which is just horrible. No, it's no, seriously. Actually, it's amazing careers we all have, and I know I speak for a lot of the folks I see on the attendee list and so forth. It's quite the time. And while you say, you know, truly enough, you know, that if you're not an ICS SCADA person, it's, you know, you at a perspective of this is very, very interesting, very unique, and I think needs to be brought in. And this is to some of the points that Tim was making as well. that we have learned these lessons in a lot of places. The challenge of the time right now is less engineering, more mechanics. We're not turning a lot of metal on lathes. We're taking parts out of cardboard boxes and bolting them together. So we need to take what we already know how to do, that we've learned and we've demonstrated as asset owners, as vendors, as information sharing structures in areas that have nothing to do with ICS, or not directly to do with, as you say, everything is everything. And we need to put them together intelligently. So that's been I think the longest and richest introduction to the panel discussion we've ever had, and I wouldn't change a moment of it. Very, very good. For the attendees out there, if you want to fire questions in or click the raise your hand button, I know many of you have things that would be wonderful to say, and we'll get that into the mix. And for the panelists as well, feel free from this point forward. We have about 20 minutes left to jump in at any time and jump on top of me or if the other anybody else talking, because I'd like to get as much out of you all as I can. That's quite a group we have. So I'm going to start with the hand raise we have out there with the inimitable Mr. Fred Cohen. If you want to take yourself off mute, I have unmuted you in the system, and you can ask your question or make your statement directly.
Greetings. Can you hear me now?
Indeed.
No, this is the first time I've done this from a pad computer with a display up on a television set, and it's an awesome technology. So my question here has to do with the fundamental thing that I face when I talk to enterprises about sharing information, and that is that they don't want to share information, and they're happy to share advertising and that sort of information, and things that are required by law they have to share, so they do the minimum they can. But when it comes to sharing security-related information, I always get contracts that are so incredibly confidential and so restrictive that I can't even tell you who I work with, and they are this way about everything. And so there's a huge cultural change, and there's a legal aspect to this in terms of liability that they perceive, and public perception and image and so forth. So I'm sort of wondering, and I understand education can get over that barrier, and that's fabulous what's happened in the education space. But for most companies I deal with, I don't see how we're going to get over that barrier. And so I recognize that if we can get 1% of water systems, we'll be doing great. And yet, I don't see how we're going to get to that percentage of industrial control systems folks in the world. And I would love to hear any good ideas how to solve this problem.
Fred, this is Mike Assante. It's been such a long time, but it's great to hear your voice. You hit the nail on the head, and I'd actually argue I'd like to add another negative implication to that behavior of some enterprises. When they're afraid to share information, and in particular in an industry that I've worked in with regulation, that fear goes up a couple of notches. In the room who decide whether information gets shared or not are lawyers. And quite honestly, you constrain the conversation that you have, so it's almost, I wouldn't say it's dishonest, but it's constrained. And that behavior replicates itself even internal to the organization. You'll find the CEOs told that that's not really possible, or this isn't really possible, even though there are elements within the enterprise that know what risks look like or know what's possible technically, and the information stalls even on the inside. So that behavior is something that is a significant challenge and a barrier. It exists in every industry application. One area where they've built mechanisms to overcome that, for example, would be I'll give you an aviation example. In the FAA, it's a regulatory regime. You have individual airlines that have pilots and conduct flights, and there was the understanding that if we're going to get better at flight safety, we need to go beyond understanding crashes and events, and we need to actually understand near misses. And so the FAA knew it was not capable of establishing such a learning program because of the fear by not only individual organizations but the pilots of the implication of sharing information about near misses. So NASA stood up a pilot reporting program It had some level of safe harbor associated with it. Pilots after every flight could go down to flight operations. It was mandated these terminals existed. They could go in there and they could actually put in, as a practitioner, they could put in the circumstance, the scenario. They could say, I was flying at so many feet, I had this near miss, it looked like this, I believe this is why it occurred. And NASA could collect it, study it, turn that learning back around to improve flight safety. If the FAA had artifacts or evidence that that near miss took place and it was obviously had a regulatory implication, and they had evidence outside of the reporting system, they could, of course, investigate it. But the individual pilot would be given credit or discretion when they actually turned to and found a pilot report. So there are some interesting systems where you almost free the practitioner, if you will, to share information about an event in a safe manner. And so that's just one example. So that's an idea I'll throw out there. The second thing I'll tell you as an asset owner, when my enterprise went and we did share information about events, I was able to very directly connect with experts that actually helped us resolve those events. And that's just this risk you take. I took great risk, and people said, hey, this is dangerous to tell folks that we're having this problem. And the reality was it helped us resolve the problem much quicker with much less consequence. So there is a payoff, and that maybe goes to some of the educational side of this. But individuals that share information or managers who make those decisions of what to share and not share feel like they're at risk, especially in areas where we have a lot of legal involved relative to compliance issues.
And I'll make a note about the education stuff, because usually that's like one of the first things I say in one of my talks. Education is very unique. There's no doubt about that, and that we were able to get through some of those barriers relatively easily, which is why we sort of acknowledge that and try to tell our story with that kind of caveat. Your mileage may vary, of course. On the flip side, we do participate with a lot of corporations, a lot of enterprises. We share data with a lot of enterprises on a regular basis. Some of those file legal frameworks. Some of those are very heavily based trust relationships. And it's only, it's data that our members allow us to share, and in turn they get data back. One thing I can tell you is that in the private sector community that we participate in, and a number of them are internationally in scope, heavy trust is involved. And when you get to a level where you can, you go to conferences, you meet people in your sector, you do a lot of relationship building, and there's regulatory requirements that other people may be subject to, which makes this harder. But the basic theory is still there, that if you're going out, if you're developing those personal trust-based relationships, the information sharing naturally just flows from there. The parts where you need to be careful are where companies are scared because they don't have those trust-based relationships. And that's sort of a middle ground. We're trying, by open sourcing our contracts and our legal agreements, we're trying to bridge some of that gap. And you build your trust relationships. You've known people for years and years and years. You start to share little bits of information to make your managers happy. I mean, we have 400 institutions in our community that all they compete for grant money and students and things like that. They don't want to share information any more than other enterprises do. But I can tell you, by going to conferences, going to the bar, drinking beer with people that work in your industry on a regular basis, and developing those social relationships, those extend to trust. And then you work on incidents together, and then you get to that comfort spot where it's just a de facto standard. You're sharing information because you have really high high trust in your counterpart to be able to do it. And then past that, the rest is automation. And I hear this argument a lot, and I've been giving these talks for about 5 or 6 years now. Not long, but enough to have heard this. And it's really go out and find your friends and really start developing those relationships and keep pounding them, because you'll find 2 or 3 that are willing to do it with you, and then 2 or 3 turns to 4 or 5, 6, and then by the and it really helps expedite the process.
Well, I think that there's on the one hand, I agree entirely. At the same time, one of the points that I make a lot is that we need to move past the beer drinking stage. We've only scaled so far, right? And in the security space, we have done all our information sharing on personal relationships, and that's great. I think part of the answer is, the slide I pulled up is an example of this. I know this looks like a star topology, but it's just from the perspective of the ICS-ISAC. From anybody else's perspective, they're the center of the star. And what both you, Wes, and Michael both said, I see us playing into the argument that part of the solution is to have lots of points, 1,000 points of light, so that among them, anybody that wants to share information to receive it or to share it. And particularly to our point now, how do we get people to share things? We have to give them options. And yes, there are motivators, capturing what you said earlier, that organizations in your world, in the education world, are saving money, saving FTEs. The old, stop selling security, start selling business, value, cash, budgets, profitability, competitiveness. That's a huge part of it. Part of it as well, that is a real functional fact, and is part of how the internet works and how open democracies exist, is altruism. So, but again, so where you have a large enough community, you have thousands and hundreds of thousands of people and facilities, provide opportunities for them to share in ways that won't get them in trouble, that they can do, that are anonymous, that are low information, that are easy, that allow them to do the right thing. And it's, so in short, it's not any one of these things. As we get to the phase where it's not just, 1991 on the internet, but it's not just, small number of people, we all know each other, but we start to get into the internet of everything, where it's not, I don't think, 50 billion connected devices, it's many more. That the whole terms of information security and cybersecurity and cyber physical systems and so forth stop meaning anything, because everything is connected to everything else. How do we protect that? How do we get information sharing working there? Part of the answer is to have lots and lots and lots of options. So we're down to the last 14 minutes, or the last 10 minutes anyways. I'd like to make sure that we get as any questions and commentary that come in, as well as opportunities for our panel to talk. And Graham, with your experience in the oil industry, I would be interested to get, and as a vendor, those issues of, because as asset owners and as vendors, we have these same sort of issues of how do we motivate people to share. And yes, there are certain things you want to share as a vendor, but there's also things you don't want to share, which gets talked about an awful lot. Would you mind?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. It's I think as quite often as a vendor, any vendor, if we find vulnerabilities in our products, or we know there's some things we don't like sharing it, we always want to try to get fixes out and then tell our the asset owners where the problems are. But quite often, I think we've got to be a bit more transparent ourselves. We've got to be a bit more forthcoming and tell people, look, we've got this problem. You can do these fixes early. We are going to make a permanent fix, but you can do this, and just as little, put a firewall and do this, and you're going to alleviate the problem. Whereas at the moment we don't. We try to normally hide that information away. And yeah, the asset owners want it, and I think we quite often will blame asset owners or integrators for not sharing, but I think we're all in the problem that none of us want to share, because we're going to be seen perhaps, or we perceive that we'd be seen as weak. We have a not a good product, we've got not a good service, whereas I think we've got to move away from that to say we're trying to improve the industry. It's just, you talk about or Michael was talking about the airline industry. Yeah, if you have a near miss or whatever, let's start reporting it. If we, when we're integrating something, or an integrator has something and it's a near miss, let's start trying to share that information so that we can learn from it and try to put things in place. And if we all hide away behind, oh, this is proprietary, we don't want to be seen as weak, we're never going to move forward. And with asset owners, I think they'll quite often, when we're in the oil industry, yes, oil companies quite often would talk to each other, and we would share things, but it wouldn't get to other people in a different sector, but they were using the same equipment or the same process. And again, we need to, at the asset owners, need to start sharing things out. And yes, there must be a way that we can anonymize this, make it so that it's not from a known person or a known site, but everybody will learn from it. And we are getting better, and as you said, where we are in the ICS world, I think we're more unique than we are in the IT world that had all these problems for many, many years. We've got an opportunity now to change this over the next 1 to 3 years and make this a very good way of sharing and improve the security for everybody. And we've all got to get together and start to do it rather than still just trying to protect our own little circle, whether it's our own company or our own product, whatever. So yes, we're getting there. We're all having these discussions, but as you said, it's moving away from I know somebody because I just had a drink with him to having something a bit more formal so that we can all learn and disseminate down to a lot more people rather than the people who just go to the conferences or that we meet in industry bodies. It needs to go out to a lot more people across the board.
Yeah, and you know, I've looked at my own career, and early in my career, 20-something years ago, I remember having panic attacks because certain things didn't exist, and having old farts who were basically my age now, right? Point out that when there's enough need, these things solve themselves. And we have enough experience now in the internet as a whole to look back, 20 and 30 years and see that, we have overcome all sorts of things that all the long hairs, and the smart people back in the day thought were going to be huge roadblocks because we had to, because you just can't get 5 billion people on a network without addressing ABC, whatever it is. And this is one of those. And one thing, Graham, is you're talking, the BP and Deepwater Horizon and the ads, and that post that BP seems to be getting a lot of, seems to be motivated now to make a marketing point of their transparency, make that part of their brand, that it's an actual advantage. And, it's, again, just one perhaps particle of how we move this forward, how we motivate massive asset owners and vendors and so forth as they find a value in a marketing value that makes people want to buy their products in being good citizens and involved in this, as opposed to just altruism and best wishes. So do you think that, I know we're all a bit cynical about all these things, but do you think BP is actually getting value from this now, or they actually believe this, or think that's helped them, their negative experience?
I think even when I was there, I think the majority of people wanted to have safe operations. None of us wanted to put things in that were unsafe. And just sometimes these things just slipped by. But yeah, I think they've certainly decided that yes, let's really improve it, and at the same time, let's market it and try to say to everybody, this is the way it should be. And hopefully everybody else will see, yes, you can't hide. You can't, even if you make a mistake, it's not worth hiding. And I think there's probably loads of other examples around in different industries. If you know there's a problem and you hide it for years and years, when it eventually gets out, people hate you a lot more, rather than standing up, putting your hand up and say, look, I've made a mistake, I'm sorry, can we get over it, and we're trying to fix it. And people respect that more than hiding it. And I think that's what we all need to do as an industry. From vendors right down to asset owners. Let's put our hand up when we've got a problem, tell people it's a problem, and tell people we're fixing it or we fixed it, and let's move on and not have the blame culture.
Yeah, and even preemptively, I've always believed this, and I've done this with small and large hats on, different organizations, and profited from it. I think this is one of these lessons we need to get, and I know my own view of all this is as small as anyone else's, but nonetheless, I did this small companies, and then as Cisco in the late 90s, early 2000s, dealt with incredible challenges. Everybody hated us, and a lot of folks who asked my advice or me explain what that was about sense, and a lot of people don't necessarily believe it, but I'll say it on the record. A lot of it had to do with the fact that we said over and over and over again that we're serious, we're not hiding anything, we take responsibility, and people ended up believing us. And we sold hundreds of millions of dollars worth of high-profit gear. So it's not just hippie talk. This is business. There is a business value in organizations, whether they're ICS asset owners or vendors or integrators or people in other sectors. There's a marketing value of engendering trust. And even in the scaly, cynical modern world, if you actually mean it and you make a point of pushing that as part of your message, it can be good for you. And you can both be more profitable, have a better business. And as you're saying, Graham, if and when, because things just happen, no matter best intentions, something happens, you may not self-destruct. You may be able to survive that and do better in the end. So, Tim, we're almost out of time. This has been a great talk, and I would hate to not give you another chance. Is there anything else you want to throw into the blender before I put on my Debbie hat and wave us away from the beer?
I think the comment that Graham made that a long time ago, from an operating perspective, everybody wanted to do the right thing and ensure that they were providing a safe and reliable environment. I think it took some time to understand that cyber components and industrial control systems played a very important role in that mission of providing a safe and reliable environment. And if you look at the operating side, again, looking at the electric sector, the operators that are responsible for providing that safe and reliable system, they have shared information very, very well. They've satisfied and kind of overcame the language issues. They've overcame the issues of what their neighboring utilities would want to see. They've provided a construct for a reliability coordinator that kind of has the wide area view. And as they have begun to understand the role of cyber in that mission of a safe and reliable environment, it's just the same struggles of what language barriers do we have to overcome, what information do we need to provide to our neighboring utilities and reliability coordinators. But one important piece that was acknowledged with the operators at many utilities as a follow-on to the blackout report that Mike had cited earlier was these events happen so fast that there's not time for an operator with the responsibility to provide a reliable and safe system to see information and then validate it through their management, validate it through legal, validate it through corporate communications, and then determine what they're going to share. And as a result, corporations from the CEO level down have signed letters, have provided this culture that their operators have the ultimate authority over the system, and they are to take the actions that they've been trained to take when they see events, and that includes information sharing. I believe once we achieve that from a cyber operator perspective, that they are ultimately responsible for managing and maintaining these systems, and they also, as part of that responsibility, will share information that will have a great impact on a number of these environments.
I couldn't possibly agree more. So with that, we have pretty well used up our time. So I am going to stand in as the lesser version of Debbie, who would do a better job if she was here. But I will say, Graham, Tim, Michael, and Wes, thank you so much for your thoughts and insights you've shared on this call. On behalf of all of us at the ICS-ISAC, we appreciate your joining us today. We hope that the attendees, both today and in the future, have found the information of value so that they can take and implement to further secure your industrial control system security. Our next briefing will be held on Wednesday, September 18th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time and feature a panel of distinguished subject matter experts presenting emergent properties of doing, talking about the value we can get of doing these things in the present and near future. Other sessions will be announced in our monthly updates on the center's website and in our other communications vehicles. So on behalf of the ISAC, I want to thank our panelists and the rest of you for coming. Thank you all for participating, and we look forward to talking to you soon and often.